What's going on, everybody? It is the one and only Q here from Retro Q Gaming, and we are taking a little bit of a trip down, I guess this kind of looks like the middle of nowhere. I guess this must be reasons why you should own a console in 2020, or at least one of the new current gen ones anyway. But that's beside the point, because we are here with our 78th episode of our Quack Experimental Podcast. If by some reason your eyes don't work, well, you can see we're doing something a little bit different today. I think I'd mix it up just a little bit, because why not, you know? Now, anyway, moving along. We got some good stuff to talk about today. We got a lot of tech, a lot of, I guess obviously gaming, and, let's get into it anyway, shall we? So first up, we have AMD GPUs. Now, AMD GPUs, we know at least 2 of the 3 new models launched fairly recently within the last couple of weeks and have practically been non-existent in order to find. In fact, AMD, funnily enough, said that, it won't be a paper GPU launch, to kind of hinting at Nvidia's one that was rumored to be a paper launch. And, it turns out the AMD GPUs are even rarer to find. And that's not because there's more demand for them. It's because there's even less of them available. So, big yikes, big oof. But anyway, everyone was wondering, of course, about the new upcoming RX6800, 6800XT, and 6900XT. Basically, the 6800XT was the one everyone had their eye on. That was the kind of, I hesitate to use the term, but it's the RTX 3080 equivalent, if you will. So that was the one everyone wanted. You had the poor people looking at the 6800, the kind of people who would buy a 3070 or something like that, or a 2060 Super. And then, of course, you've got the likes of the 6900 XT. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We're going to really focus on the main card for this one, the 6800 XT. Now, the benchmarks for this card are finally out. This is an important one to note because, as I mentioned, with all the stuff, when Nvidia give you benchmarks on their cards, when AMD give you benchmarks on their cards, when AMD give you benchmarks on their CPUs, when Intel give you benchmarks on their CPUs, you always take it with a massive grain of salt. In fact, you take it with a big heaping bowl of salt, because you are not sure on the real world applications of this. Now, you can typically deduce that you'll get roughly a ballpark figure of this, but let's look at it this way. They could run a benchmark and face a wall and say, we got 120 FPS because we were facing a wall, but in real world gameplay you're going to get 70 FPS. So you always wait for third-party independent ones. And the third-party independent benchmarks for the RX 6800 XT are finally out. And sadly, AMD cannot keep their track record like they had with Ryzen. Of course, Ryzen brought them back into the game and out of obscurity, to the point where I've already bought a Ryzen 5900X, I should say. I'm getting all mixed up with the 6800 and 5900 and whoa lad. But yes, you get the idea. But sadly, everyone was hoping they could kind of almost keep the same type of track record with their new GPUs, because all previous AMD GPUs have been complete garbage, and when you compare them to the Nvidia equivalent, trying to say Nvidia equivalent is a bit of a woo lad. But yeah, it was not a good time. And it seems like this is going to be the case yet again. So what we have in here is the 6800 XT is comparable to the RTX 3080. Now, there's a couple of big caveats with this. So, depending on what game you look at, you have a couple of games that favor Nvidia, you have a couple of games that favor AMD, and you have just kind of generic games that don't affiliate themselves with either. And for the most part, when you're looking at all these benchmarks, you get one main thing to take away from all of this. Overall, the RTX 3080 is better. Now, when I say better, it's usually only marginally better. You might be talking 5%, you might be talking 5 FPS, but overall the point is the card is better from straight up raw performance. And that's in most games. Now, of course, there's a big couple of extra important things to talk about that really factor in any GPU buyer. And here is what we're talking about. So naturally, there's a big focus, a big push towards ray tracing the last 2 years, when it became commercially and properly viable for GPUs to actually do so. We had the likes of the RTX 2080 Ti being the flagship for about 2 years, and that was a big deal because it could now do proper in-game live ray tracing at 60 FPS, which of course is the important thing. Now, everyone was wondering because AMD's previous series didn't support ray tracing, but it was told that this one will. The new RX6000 series will support ray tracing, and it does. However, there's a couple of problems in there. Unlike Nvidia's previous RTX 20 series and their current RTX 30 series, which have special dedicated hardware cores just designed for ray tracing and to handle the ray tracing, AMD's option in the RX6800XT, as well as the lower end and higher end cards, do not have dedicated specific hardware for ray tracing, meaning it's all handled on the compute units in the card itself, which means it can significantly detract from a bunch of other stuff. And not only that, but because there's not dedicated hardware specifically for that, the performance absolutely tanks. And frankly, from what we've seen, the RX6800XT is complete garbage for ray tracing. Now, depending on the game you're running and the games you're looking at and the benchmarks and all here, the NVIDIA RTX 3080 can offer 500% performance compared to the 6800XT. Let me give you a quick example of what that means. If, say, the RX 6800XT with ray tracing on gives you 100 FPS, the NVIDIA RTX 3080 gives you 500 FPS. That's a bit unwieldy and unfeasible in real-world terms, so let's break it down to something that's a bit more obvious. If you were to play a certain game with a, let's say, an RTX 3080, you might get 100 FPS with ray tracing turned on. And then compared to an RX 6800XT, which would give you 20 FPS. Big difference there between playing at 100 FPS and 20 FPS, or 100 and 500, but you get the idea. That's some more real world style. And in some cases, you have big jumps like this, 100%, 200% performance, 50% performance, 250, 300, whatever it is. Some of those are even including without using DLSS, which of course, because it is a lower native resolution upscaling AI software, or well, I guess it has the hardware in it, but you get the idea of what DLSS is. That gives you even more of an FPS boost because of the fact you're rendering at a lower native resolution. Of course, many people love DLSS because it allows them to punch above their weight, but you get the idea. Of course, it does, like I said, factor. Some of it is native, some of it is DLSS, but the point is NVIDIA cards offer significant ray tracing performance in games, and it can be a game changer, a deal breaker, whatever it is. Like I said, comparing 20 FPS to 100 FPS, there's no comparison in that way. One of them is completely unusable garbage in that exact scenario. Now, of course, because this is the 6800XT, this is the middle of the road card. There's one below it with the regular 6800, which is obviously even worse. And then, of course, we also have one remaining card that is, well, the 6900XT, to be released, of course, in just over a week on December 8th. And this is the only remaining wild card because this has a couple of other things to factor in as well. But based on what we've seen and the benchmarks we've been given and what we can kind of deduce and surmise with the 6800 XT, we can expect the 6900 XT to have great normal performance, to trade blows, if not sometimes be even better than the likes of an RTX 3090, which is what it's mainly compared to. But we can also expect it to be terrible in ray tracing. It probably won't be as terrible simply because of the higher clock speeds, the higher core counts, the higher compute units, etc. The higher everything except the RAM, really, 16 gig across all cards. But you can basically say that the ray tracing is still going to be pretty bad in there as well, and pretty bad to the point where it would likely still bring the card down to worse than a 3080. Of course, the 3080 being cheaper is the important thing here, because let's face it, the retail price on a 3080 is, I think it's what, $699, maybe $799, but a 3090 is $1,500, and a 6900 XT sits somewhere in the middle, offering what is supposed to be, at least anyway, 3090 level performance and everything but ray tracing for $999. So you're talking 33% price drop. It gives a bit of an issue. It gives you a bit of a stuck in between a rock and a hard place, if you will, because let's face it, as more and more games support ray tracing going forward, it's likely, if you ask me, going forward going to become another industry standard feature, like lighting, like shadows, like ambient occlusion, like texture quality, like everything. It's likely going to be there because we're going to progress forward and forward and forward. Every new generation of graphics card is going to make ray tracing and the ray tracing load even lighter, and you will take even less performance hit from it, and you'll get even higher quality out of it as well. So you can see why it's important going forward. But as it stands at the moment, these cards, these AMD cards, are DOA and all worthless. Because if they're not even supporting this now to the point where they can't even run, let's call them next generational games, although you're going to find me swapping over to call it the current gen because it now is current gen. Yeah, I mean, what's the point? It kind of really shows when you think about it. They're all RDNA based 2 cards, RDNA 2 based cards, and new consoles, which are also awful and also have terrible ray tracing and are just awful in their GPU performance. Well, they're all based on the same stuff. I guess we should have seen it coming. So next up, we're going to talk a little bit about ray tracing and how it's going to get a bit messy and all here. Now, we're going to specifically start with the AMD side of it, but this thing we're going to talk about, it applies to both sides, AMD and Nvidia, which we'll discuss now. So remember, real quick, before we go any further, that both current gen consoles, the Xbox Series MES, as well as the PlayStation 5, are AMD RDNA 2 based, same as the GPUs we just talked about a minute ago. Essentially, AMD hardware. That's the important thing. Now, first off, we're going to look at Godfall. Godfall is a game that is currently only available on PlayStation 5 and PC. It will be coming to Xbox down the line, but it is a next generation, or current generation, I suppose. I still need to get into the habit of all that. Current generational game. Now, it features ray tracing and all on this too, but the latest patch, on the PC version at least anyway, it finally adds support for ray tracing. It wasn't there at launch. But strangely enough, it's only on AMD cards. Now, there's multiple different ways that this is weird, because they have said that Nvidia ray tracing will come later, or support for Nvidia cards with ray tracing will come later. Now this is very weird, because Nvidia's cards that have supported ray tracing have been around for longer. They've been around for 2-ish years at this point, just over 2 years. I believe it was August of 2018 when they were first announced, or maybe that was when they launched, but I think they were announced earlier, but then they launched in August, September. But you get the idea. The series, the RTX 2000 series, is 2 years old. So they've had time to work with all this, to work with the ray tracing and all as well, versus AMD. Now, of course, I'm sure because they were working on the consoles and the dev kits and all as well, they had access to, or early access to, RDNA 2 based architecture to work with the ray tracing involved and on the consoles and the AMD side and all as well. But still, they've done all this other stuff for the Nvidia cards, the GTX series, the RTX series, whatever it is. But apparently, they're only doing it on AMD first and Nvidia will come later. This begs the question, is this some type of sponsorship deal? Now, off the top of my head, I don't know if Godfall is AMD's sponsored game, but it wouldn't surprise me if it was. Now, on the flip side, here's how this also works. This is something that has a bigger ramification that we'll get to now in a second. But first off, secondly, Cyberpunk 2077, the game that supports ray tracing, but it will only support ray tracing on Nvidia cards at launch, and AMD will come later, they've said. So again, the same type of deal. Now this again is kind of expected when you think about it, because over the entire time Cyberpunk 2077 and CD Projekt Red have been advertising and using Nvidia related features and specs and all. They've been showing them off for all their higher quality everything. So it kind of makes sense that that would be the big focus. Like say Godfall, if it was sponsored on the other side, would be working with the AMD stuff. But this begs the big question. Are we going to see all these bullshit sponsored games locking out ray tracing now? Because if so, I fucking called this as a mad concern months ago, when we didn't know anything about AMD's proper ray tracing at the time, and everything was just going off, I guess it was marketed as RTX. So, Is this going to be another one? I've complained about sponsored games for the longest times. Even though it's benefited me most of the times, I still don't believe in it because most games would be sponsored by Nvidia, the superior GPU company with superior hardware and superior software and superior tech. But you would have companies like AMD, they would lock out, let's say, Borderlands 3. This is always one of my favorite examples because Borderlands 2 had PhysX, Nvidia PhysX, after they bought it from IGEA, or I can never pronounce that, years and years prior. But the point is that if you look at the PhysX implementation in Borderlands 2, it's phenomenal. It's fantastic. The game is 8 years old, and it's still one of the best implementations of PhysX in any game. And AMD sponsored Borderlands 3. They locked out Nvidia from including PhysX and all of their new updated stuff as well. And Nvidia, or should I say, because Nvidia were locked out, you would think AMD could put in some of their own versions and their own tech and whatnot too. Except AMD doesn't have any of that tech. There is basically nothing added in from the AMD side to help. It was just done to lock out the competition because of their superior technology. Are we going to be seeing this with ray tracing now? Because keep in mind, most of these games, there's only, I believe it's 3 different games that actually use proper proprietary NVIDIA RTX. This was something that I actually made a mistake on for months and months until fairly recently. But there's only 3 games out there at the moment that support specific NVIDIA RTX that will not be able to be used on AMD cards. One of these is Wolfenstein Youngblood. Another one is Quake 2 RTX, and I can't remember what the third game is. But that's the point. Everything else is just based on DXR, DirectX Ray Tracing, which any card that supports ray tracing can support in Windows. But now it seems, even though it's kind of an open technology, and because of all of that, and just like the upcoming, well, I guess it's properly fully released now as well, the Vulkan one is out now as well. Vulkan-based ray tracing is supported too. That's officially out and open and whatnot now, so that could be used by both. But are we going to see companies sponsoring games to lock out the other for ray tracing? And even though I'll have an RTX 3080, the superior card for ray tracing and just kind of overall performance anyway versus the equivalent of the competition, I still don't want to see it locking out other people. Competition is good. Competition breeds innovation. Not just this bullshit kind of practice. I don't want to see this from AMD. I don't want to see this from Nvidia. It's complete bullshit. We've seen stuff like this when people buy exclusivity for features, exclusivity for games, timed exclusivity for games, store exclusivity for games, for DLC, for whatever the fuck it is. This shit needs to stop. But anyway, let's move away from all that negativity and kind of worry and whatnot too, because we're going to talk about some positive stuff. We're like the Iron Sheik up in here. We positive, baby. We positive, we positive. And I'm talking Halo 4. Now, Halo 4 just came to the PC version of the Master Chief Collection. And let me tell you this, it is so fucking good. It plays so ridiculously well. Now, you might not know this. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But let's look at it this way, okay? If you've played Halo 4, even if you've played Halo 4 on the 360, or if you played it as part of the Master Chief Collection on Xbox One, Xbox One S, or even Xbox One X, you know that it's kind of a mediocre game in general. It's not great, but it's not terrible. It's serviceable, if you will. It's a serviceable Halo entry, as long as you don't compare it to any of the Bungie games. But the big important thing here is the PC version, the PC port, is so damn good. First off, it's got proper remastered quality and textures and all as well, unlike many of the previous games, which were just resolution increases and all as well. But Halo 4 actually got that proper increase boost over just the regular version of the game. But not only that, not only does it look better, not only does it play better because the game runs so smoothly, even with the complete proper enhanced visual set, it's running at a locked 120 FPS for me, but it plays with mouse and keyboard. It is brilliant. That super high frame rate, that control of the mouse and keyboard, the responsiveness, the accuracy, the fluidity, everything. It actually feels like an entirely different game from any version of Halo 4 I've played before. And I played it on Xbox 360, on Xbox One and Xbox One X, and it feels like an entirely different game, to the point where it's unbelievable that any of the previous versions of this game, be it 360 or Xbox One in any of its forms, released at all. It literally feels like so much of a difference that the other versions of the game, the console versions, feel like 50% complete beta tests. It's that far ahead. Not every game, when ported to PC and a PC version, not every game is that much of a difference. But this one, it's almost insulting that the console version that the console versions, because it applies to all of them, ever released in any way, shape, or form. They feel like the equivalent of playing the Bayonetta PS3 port. It's that level of bad by comparison when you're playing the PC version compared to those old crappy versions and all as well. Everyone, buy Halo the Master Chief Collection on PC. It is the best form of all these games. It even completely shits all over the Xbox Series mess versions of the games because they still have dynamic resolutions, they still run with frame drops, and they still don't even use the PC's max settings as well. And of course, you don't have a mouse and keyboard like you do on the glorious PC Gaming Master Race. And of course, it's free to play online as well. There's a Steam sale on. Go and pick it up right now, because that is the important thing, especially because you've got FOV sliders as well. And now you're probably wondering, but Q, the Xbox version has FOV slider as well. That is correct. But if you mess with the FOV slider at all on the Xbox Series mess, no matter what you use, if you touch it above the default setting, the game is locked to 60 FPS. Imagine that. I don't have that problem. I can put it on whatever I want. I have it cranked up almost fully because I can't deal with like 120 FOV. It's just a bit too much for me. But I think I have it on about 105, and it's running 120 FPS with the full enhanced visuals. Because remember when I said the Xbox Series mess couldn't run it all properly? Yeah, if you read the wording and the descriptions, it's similar settings to PC enhanced, not the actual PC enhanced settings. Halo 4 is absolutely so good. It's been elevated so much more, and my opinion of the game has completely changed thanks to the absolutely amazing PC version. Now I just can't wait to see what the inevitable Halo 5 port is like when that's elevated because of all the quality, the performance, the visuals, the graphics, and of course the mouse and keyboard. Whoa, that's going to be it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. But next up, we'll talk about some Doom Eternal. Now, when I say Doom Eternal, we are looking at not just how amazing and great the PC version is, but we're going to talk about the version that shouldn't even exist, the absolute opposite version, or as I like to call it, the piece of Switch version, because it is absolutely going to be brutal. Now, the important one that we're going to talk about here is just how can we describe it? How much of an afterthought, how much of an irrelevant feature it is that the physical version of Doom Eternal on Switch, which as I count right now is still 8 months post-launch everywhere else and hasn't even been shown running on a Switch with no update or proper date or anything like that, well, all the physical versions have been cancelled. GameStop in the US is calling everyone, telling them that it had been cancelled. Now, of course, many people were automatically freaking out, thinking that the game itself, or the port itself anyway, entirely was cancelled. But it was clarified later that day in an actual public announcement that the game is still in development, still planned for release. But, well, the Switch version, physical edition, is gone bye-bye because they are that much of an afterthought. They're that much. They know their sales are going to be that low. They know it's not worth the effort. They know the proprietary physical media is going to cost more. Absolute joke of a system. And I am happy that their physical edition is cancelled. I would be happier if their entire edition was cancelled, just because it's not even worth putting on the system if you ask me. But hey, you got the usual Nintendo and conspiracy theories that they're blaming Microsoft. It's like, oh, Microsoft are already fucking over the Switch with their acquisition of ZeniMax. But fam, I know you Switch guys and you Nintendoans, I know you can't read or understand logic, but that sale of ZeniMax to Microsoft doesn't go through until the second half of 2021. Microsoft have no input whatsoever on what they do beforehand. So, yeah, get wrecked. Use logic. Idiots. I guess this is why they are the worst fan base in gaming after all. Drones. But anyway, we can move on to our next one here as well. Now, we've been talking a lot lately about game TV show adaptations. I mean, just off the back of Netflix and their 600 different shows based on game IPs that they've had, including their newest one, Assassin's Creed. And of course, the Cowboy Bebop, which is going to be completely panned and destroyed, and even has their shitty actors insulting fans. That's a great thing to do months in advance, isn't it? Of something that's going to be highly controversial and probably a load of bullshit. But anyway, next up we've got HBO. Now, you might remember PlayStation Productions, the new media studio from Sony. They have just finished their work on the new Uncharted film with Tom Holland. And they have not only completed all of that, but now they've been moving on. So now they've sold off their rights to a Last of Us TV show. And this has been sold off to HBO, home box office. You might remember them from the likes of Boardwalk Empire and, well, I guess the big important one that more people know is Game of Thrones. But you get the idea. So far, we don't know too much about it just yet. There's no casting details or anything, which of course in a thing like this is going to be very, very important. We don't know the very, very specific details and what it's going to cover, only the fact that it's going to follow the first game's journey across America. Now, it doesn't say what part of the journey, it doesn't say if it's from when Joel and Ellie first meet up to when the end of the game happens. I won't put it in there just in case it's related to the TV show and you haven't played the game, but it's not exactly saying the details of it just yet. Now, like I said, we don't have the casting details and all. We don't have a date or when it's going to happen. We don't know too many people that are involved as well, other than one or two of the executives from Naughty Dog. But they're all talentless hacks anyway that we've seen from 2020. So there is one important one. Since we don't have an official cast list or anything like this, well, now we can play with a little bit of who and what if and all that too. Now, I'm not going to go through every single character. In fact, I'm only going to go through Joel and Ellie. So, what would we do? Now, Ellen Page might not manage Ellie anymore based on her literal age at this point. In fact, you might even remember that when The Last of Us was very, very, very first shown off, Ellie actually had a different design, which was almost completely identical to Ellen Page, and then they changed it and cast it and recast it, I guess. And it's funny, even Ellen Page came out and said, "Oh, I'm sorry to see when people are stealing my appearance and all that stuff too." So it's a bit extra funny in that way. But I don't think Ellen Page could pull off the Ellie thing anymore. Who knows? Maybe they could digitally de-age her with all the technology and all these days. But here's one thing I will say. There's plenty of different actors you could reliably get to play Joel. I see many people out there saying Jason Momoa. I don't really agree with that. I've even seen some people out there saying Jared Butler. I don't really agree with that. But you know who does need to play Joel? You know who would be a complete lock for Joel, if you ask me? Now, I'll probably butcher his name because it's a bit of a complex Italian-style name. But what we need for Joel is Joe Manganiello. I think I got his name right. Joe Manganiello would play a mean Joel. If you've seen True Blood, which, spoiler alert, I'm admitting to have actually seen almost all of it. If you have seen him in that, you'll know he'd be a good Joel. He's got the look, he's got the build. In fact, he's bigger and more ripped than Joel. So he's got the kind of frame, is the big important one. He could clearly pull off the action stuff and all because of it too. And he's got the southern accent. As far as I know, it's not his real accent, but he can pull off a reliable southern accent in the TV show. Therefore, he could do it, again, because I believe Joel is from Texas. At least, it starts from Texas at the very start of the first game. I don't know if they grew up there, but you get the idea. He has a southern accent. So, Manganiello, Joel, this shit writes itself, guys. Send me the check. We done. Personally, I am happy about this. I can't wait to see how it happens. We all know the second game is an absolute travesty, but the first game, which this one is going to follow, that's a whole other story. But speaking of other things that are adaptations in some way, shape and form from a different media, we've got Marvel's Avengers. Now, we all know we talked about Marvel's Avengers before and how it was a disaster and a travesty, shit game, was completely broken and has been panned and pretty much flopped. Well, it gets worse, because even though they didn't give 100% accurate specifics last time we talked about it when they had their investor call, well, it's been announced during another one that Square Enix have not even broke even yet on Marvel's Avengers. They haven't even recouped the cost. In fact, that means they have lost money. So they have lost money and haven't even made back what it cost to make the game itself. Even when you take into consideration all the licensing fees, the agreements, everything they get paid for and all as well, and of course the sales on top of it, they haven't even made the money that it cost to make the game. Now, this completely serves them right for making a shit game. And I'd say that this is a lesson to them and what they should learn and all as well. And that every other company should also take note of this whole thing. But unfortunately, it seems to already have been a lesson in a different way. Because Square Enix have expressed interest in selling off their entire games division to a Western publisher. That wouldn't just mean the likes of Crystal Dynamics or a couple of the other studios in there as well. That includes their creative divisions with Final Fantasy. That is not something I ever want to see happen. I mean, granted, Square Enix haven't even done a great job of Final Fantasy since Final Fantasy X. I mean, I guess Final Fantasy 12 was good, but it was nowhere near as good as the likes of 7, 9, 10, 6. But you get the idea. Final Fantasy 13, 13.2, 13.3, 14, 11. We all know how 15 went. All the various spin-offs and all that other crap as well. And who knows with 16. But, oh, you know what? I said I wouldn't really want it to happen. Who knows? Maybe give it to Atlas. Maybe Sega can buy it. Give the Final Fantasy IP to Atlas. They've already dethroned Square Enix as king of the JRPG in the last 10 to 15 years. Who knows? Maybe they'd make a better Final Fantasy than Square Enix. Long knows Squaresoft is long since dead, and their quality and legacy is nowhere to be found. But that brings us to the most important thing here. No, I'm not talking about what we're looking at in this quiet, serene little desert trip, but we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on, what's been up, what's going down, what is the 411, what is going on, what are you playing? Well, it's been a bit of an interesting one since the last time we did one of these, because I finished Persona 5 Royal, a fantastic, amazing game, an even more enhanced and expanded version of Persona 5. Again, another fantastic and amazing game. So that is something that is very, very near and dear and close to me. As far as the new content in the game goes, the additional scenario, I'm not going to go into talk big about it and the details and specifics and whatnot. It was interesting enough, but it didn't really hook me and grab me in entirely like the rest of the game did. Like, say, Persona 5, or I guess the main section of Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal. It didn't hook me in as much as that. Maybe it's because I already had that stuff done and I was just moving on and seeing how it fit in. Of course, with the changes along the way, incorporating the other characters and all along during the main style and main portion of the game. I mean, that stuff wasn't really bad, but it was the extra content. It was good. It wasn't as good as the main game. It didn't feel tacked on or anything like that. But I will say this, there was one thing that really, really annoyed me. There was a visual thing and a music change from the day-to-day activities and stuff in the new section. I hated that part of it. But other than that, I can't complain. It's more Persona 5 quality stuff, and I definitely can't complain about that. It was the best game I played in 2017, and it was so good it jumped into my top 10 games of all time. So, oh, and you may be wondering, but Q, what about Persona 5 Royal? Well, Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal share the exact same spot. Now, it would be unfair if I put them in two different spots, so you get the idea. But on top of that, we also finished Halo 4 on the PC version, which of course, as we already talked about, it's amazing, it's fantastic, you get the idea. It was really nice that it came out around the time I finished Persona 5 Royal, so I could bounce in between them, and then after I finished Persona 5 Royal, I could move on and just finish up Halo 4. It was really nice and worked really well as a great palate cleanser, because every time I finish a big, long RPG, 80, 100, 120 hours, I mean, this took me 120 hours to finish Persona 5 Royal, I need something different. I need something to change. I need something kind of a mindless game, if you will, just a mindless, storyless action game usually. It just completely changes me away from the mindset and everything for playing a JRPG, which means I can go back to a new one refreshed and not burnt out on a big JRPG style story, if you will. And that means I can invest in it properly, I can focus on it properly and play it properly. And Halo 4, thankfully, has done that. So that is really good there too. And of course, like I said, we already mentioned just how good the Halo 4 PC port is, and it feels like an entirely new and different game. Highly recommended. Now, gaming wasn't the only thing we had going on this time though, because there's also some anime. I finally rewatched an anime that I hadn't seen in nearly 20 years since it was current. I rewatched the entirety of Full Metal Alchemist and the film for it as well, The Conqueror of Shambhala. So, that's nice to also have over and done with. Again, it also worked in the space as well as a good palate cleanser because it was in the same time too. Stuff that just, even if it wasn't gaming, it just took me away from big RPG gaming. So that worked really well. I will be moving on to Brotherhood very, very soon. I have it sitting over there right now actually. And that will be coming fairly soon. I have never properly watched Brotherhood. I've watched all of Full Metal Alchemist and Conqueror of Shambhala back in the day when they came out. But when Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood came out, I watched about 5 or 6 episodes. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to wait. I don't like watching stuff week to week. And then I just kind of never got around to it. But now, no time like the present, even if it is all these years late. I don't have all the OVAs, but I do have the film, The Sacred Star of, is it Milios, whatever it is. And of course, the entire series. So that's going to be next up on the watch list too. But other than that, there's not really been much going on. I did do a quick stream of Stardew Valley recently, just kind of in the middle of the night. I just wanted something to chill and relax to. And it could lend itself to just a sit back, chillax, relax, whatever it is kind of thing. Just a no stress grind. No, I can't even say grind because that game couldn't, maybe a time waster game, if you will. And Lord knows, some of us really need that these days. I know I definitely do. So that might be a nice thing that I can just throw in every so often. If I do decide to, I probably won't even play it off stream. I'll just sit down, relax, chill, play for an hour or two whenever I feel like I need it, and just go from there. But other than that, because of stuff like Halo 4 and Full Metal Alchemist and all as well, I do feel like it's time for me, or it's very, very close for a time to me to move back on to another big RPG and all as well. I have a couple in my mind that I want to play. There's maybe 3 or 4 big important ones that I want to play on there too. One of them is slightly edging out the others. That could be the next potential one. I'm not going to tell you what it is just yet. But, well, we'll see how it goes. I want to see how the feeling is. I want to see what I feel like when I actually start it. And then when I do commit to it, that's something I want to go through it anyway. But that is it for the meantime for our episode 78 of our Quack Experimental Podcast. So, as always, hit up that comment section down below. It's there for a reason. That reason is for you guys to leave whatever it is, questions, comments, opinions, salt, butthurt, praise, whatever it is. It all goes down there in that place. Other than that, of course, remember, hit the appropriate button to let me know how I did on the video, and while you're at it, why not head over, hit the subscribe button, and even ring the little notification bell, so you can be one of those glorious little people that gets one of these notifications whenever we put one of these little episodes up, because in the new current schedule, who knows when the hell that's going to be. But anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and remember that winners don't play switch ports.